Now, from a unionist's point of view, the agreement marked a betrayal by the Thatcher government, and they weren't shy about showing their feelings. In this report from 1985, David Shuckman reports on a visit by then Secretary of State Tom King to Belfast City Hall. And look out for a starring appearance by the current chairman of the Stormont Health Committee.
The protesters gathered outside the City Hall shortly before 1 o'clock and used a car to block the rear gate. The police tried to get them to move it, but they wouldn't. And Tom King's bodyguards then clearly decided to use another door at the side of the City Hall. But the demonstrators ran round to confront the Secretary of State, and as he left his car, he was jostled and eggs were thrown. He was then bundled back into his car and was hurriedly slipped in by the rear gate. The protesters maintained their presence outside, and some, including the Belfast councillor George Seawright, tried to get in. They said their protest was a clear sign to the government about Unionist anger over the Anglo Irish Agreement.
There was some amount of jostling, but could I say a number of leading DUP members attempted to restrain the crowd, who were quite justifiably angry about the sellout. And in fact, the Secretary of State, as far as I'm aware, was not physically assaulted by anyone in the group, though there was a general fracas.
He was seen to have an arm around his neck at one stage, and you yourself were seen to hit his car with your flagpole.
Well, certainly at one stage, I think there was an arm wrapped around the Secretary of State's neck, but I think that was just what one would expect in the general melee that developed.
After cat-and-mouse tactics to try to confuse the demonstrators, Mr. King was then ushered out after the lunch, but he had to face another noisy confrontation.
Well, that youthful protester joins us now, DUP MLA Jim Wells. Jim Wells, obviously you haven't changed a bit.
Thank you, Jim.
But, you know, seriously, arm around the neck, that's just the sort of thing that happens, really?
Well, passions were running high, Jim. There had been no consultation. There was cross-border bodies established without any consent from the unionist population, and tempers were very hot and heavy.
But sitting here today as an MLA, how much of what we have in place today can you admit is a result of what was put in place in the Anglo Irish Agreement?
But Jim, there's a fundamental difference. First of all, the unionist population agreed at St Andrews to what the institutions that are now there, and also we put in mechanisms to stop anything which we feel is objectionable. So therefore, the difference was in 1985 we were consulted by nobody about the agreement, and we had no control over it. So the situation has moved on.
Yeah, but the historians or perhaps the political strategists looking at it now at this point in time will say as part of the game plan to get unionists to the table, it was necessary at some stage to break the veto.
No, but I think it set back relationships both within the Northern Ireland community and between ourselves and the Republic back by decades. Now things have moved on and those relationships have improved dramatically, I accept that. But at the time, we represented those who were protesting the overwhelming view of the unionist population. They felt utterly betrayed by what happened in '85, and we had full support from the community.
Do you think now, though, looking back, whether that protest or some of the other, perhaps even more vicious ones, and we saw hundreds of people perhaps intimidated, there were 150 RUC officers had to leave their homes during that period. Do you think that things got out of hand, and should unionism have perhaps provided a stronger hand to people to say, well, protest, but in a legitimate and lawful manner?
There were those who hijacked the protest, the legitimate concerns about the Anglo Irish Agreement, and did things which were totally reprehensible. But I think the unionist leadership at the time did try genuinely to ensure that all protests were as peaceful as possible. And generally speaking, all the ones that certainly I was involved into, we tried to exercise restraint in the midst of a community that was seething about what happened in November '85.